Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you. My name is Victor Kipiani. I'm the chairman of our Georgian think tank Geocase. We have a special and very distinguished guest today to speak. His Excellency Mr. IMAMURA Akira, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Japan to Georgia. We will be speaking on on relatively unknown topic of Japanese matter, which is Japan's foreign policy. The ambassador, His Excellency, has kindly agreed to educate Georgian audience on some at least basic elements of what Japan's foreign policy stands for. We should admit that there is, to some extent, relatively limited knowledge, and we would be very much looking forward, Your Excellency, to hear your observations, your notes and remarks. What is Japan's foreign policy, which is changing, from my standpoint, quite interestingly and quite dynamically. There are many points which Japan is facing today in relation to posture of Japan towards Taiwan, South Korea, supporting various moves by the United States to pressure Beijing. Many transformative changes when we speak about the ground self-defense forces of Japan. I would also be very much keen to explore more on the Quad, which is quadrilateral security dialogue. So all in all, Japan seems to be in the great geopolitical trajectory between the great ally, which is the United States, and the great power, which is China. And that also bears some semblance with Georgian case. And I would pretty much expect that would be some comparisons which we could make on the Georgian side, some lessons, if you will. Obviously, Japan is craving for greater autonomy in the region, but still would be trying sort of not to be abandoned by its great ally, which is the United States of America. But I would rather stop here and would give a floor to a much qualified and competent person, His Excellency. Mr. Imamura, you are very welcome, and thank you very much indeed for agreeing to take part in this webinar. So your presentation, sir, and then probably several questions from my side or either from the side of audience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Victor, for kind introduction. My name is Akira Imamura, Ambassador of Japan to Georgia. I'm a professional diplomat. I joined the Japanese Foreign Service in 1984. So maybe for many of our today's audience, it's before your birth. I've been involved in diplomatic service for more than 35 years. I have come to Georgia at the end of last year. So I'm still new, 5 months, 6 months old, still discovering, meeting many people. And one thing I feel is that in a very good sense, very good, actually surprise in a good sense, is that people in Georgia is quite keen on knowing more about Japan. And I find that the interest toward Japan, or at least the current knowledge about Japan, is mostly about culture, history, maybe sport like sumo or judo, those martial arts, economy, advanced technologies, Japanese products, but lacking another important aspect of Japan, which is foreign relations, diplomacy, and Japan's position in the world, changing world. So that's why I discussed with Victor, why not present my vision, or Japan's vision actually, about our foreign relations under the subject today, proactive contribution to peace. This is a title I quoted from our national security strategy, which was adopted several years ago in Japan. Today, I'll be first talking about a little bit of history of Japan's foreign policy, Then second slide will be today's security environment surrounding Japan. And then I'll be talking about our response in 5 areas. And then in the end, I'll talk a little bit about Japan-Georgia relations as I see today. So first, history. Start of Japan's post-war diplomacy, which was in 1945. We lost the war against United States, United Kingdom, China, and other allied countries. So United States started the occupation of Japan in August 1945. And next year, United States led the drafting of new constitution of Japan, which transferred the sovereign power from the emperor to the people. And US supported Japan in reviving our democratic tendencies, which we had in 1910s or 20s, a little bit like Georgian First Republic. Article 9 of the Constitution renounced the war and the military capabilities in order to conduct war, reflecting the people's strong pacifism at that point, which is still enjoying a large popularity in Japan. So next year, or maybe 2 years after, North Korea was proclaimed this establishment of communist regime. And next year, 1949, Chinese Communist Party won the war against the Kuomintang, the current regime, or the party that controlling Taiwan right now. So Cold War in Asia was already very much visible in Eastern Asia. And actually, hot war started the next year, 1950, in Korean Peninsula. So for Japan, against the background of strong pacifism after the devastation, we needed to combine the realism of dealing with the Cold War situation and pacifism amongst the people. The answer to this was to on one hand, of course, peace treaty is needed after the war, but on the other hand, have a Japan-US security treaty through which we can secure the US military presence in order to deal with the new situation, the Cold War situation in East Asia. This was led by Prime Minister Yoshida at that time. So we call this Yoshida Doctrine. It's a combination of a deterrence by US forces on the ground in Japan and focus on economic reconstruction while having a small-scale self-defense forces, which was established a little bit later. So it's a combination of deterrence by US presence and small-scale Japanese armed forces, which was, under our interpretation, allows under Article 9 of the Constitution. This is Prime Minister Yoshida signing the San Francisco Peace Treaty in 1951. So we ended effectively the war with United States, United Kingdom, other allied powers, but USSR didn't sign this treaty. So we continued negotiation with other countries. So with Russia, we concluded in 1956 an agreement to normalize relations. But Northern Territories, 4 islands that we claim off the coast of Hokkaido, our northern island, this issue was not resolved. With the Republic of Korea, we normalized in 1965, with People's Republic of China in 1972. So we changed sides from recognition of Taiwan to PRC in 1972, following many of other countries. And then we started to join multilateral institutions like United Nations, International Monetary Fund, General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, and later G7 Summit in 1975. So we fully were, by that time, by end of 50s or the 60s, were welcomed by international community. Now, today, how does it look like? We are surrounded by very big military powers. So you see the concentration is Chinese military powers, like around 90 980,000 troops. North Korea, it's around 1,000,000 and 100,000 troops. Russian Far East, 80,000. Those are who are in the continent. On the side of US allies, Japan has around 140 to 150,000 troops. With US troops, it says 21,000, but the actual figure as of today is 55,000 troops right now. It's the biggest US military presence outside of the United States. Second is Germany. Third is Republic of Korea. As you see here, ROK, the South Korea, has about 500,000 troops. With US troops, it says 15,000 here on the screen, but actual figure right now, this is a little bit outdated. So it's like 29,000 as of today. And on Taiwan, in Taiwan, you see the figures right here written. And I'll mention that the latest developments a little bit later. So let's talk about difficulties, the challenges we're facing, North Korea's nuclear and missile threats and abduction issue. North Korea has developing these capabilities, has conducted several nuclear bomb testing and developing various range of missile capabilities, including long range, mid range, short range ballistic missiles, which is a direct threat to Japan. And abduction issues peculiar but interesting in the sad sense. The Japanese nationals, at least 17 of them were abducted in 1970s, 80s, and 5 of them returned in 2000s. The reason why they abducted, the North Koreans, actually probably the spies came and abducted from right on the ground of Japanese territory and took them away on the ship and brought them to North Korea. The reason was probably to train in Japanese language North Korean future spies, which was supposed to be, or even in reality, sent to Japan in filtering Japanese society. And we're very much very strongly demanding North Korea to return the remaining people. Attempts to unilaterally change status quo on East and South China Seas. I'll talk about this a little bit in details later. And China-Taiwan military balance. The Taiwan's military capability, as you see on the box here, but because of the Chinese, continental China, Beijing's military capabilities now overtaking Taiwan. So the balance is in favor of China right now, not just in terms of quantity, but it looks like in terms of quality, China is very quickly modernizing its troops. So Japan's position on Taiwan, continental China relations, of course, is to hope for the peaceful resolution and promotion of dialogue between the two entities. But the military balance is tilting towards Beijing, which so far never abandoned its intention to overtake China by Taiwan by military forces. This policy has never been abandoned, so that makes us very worrisome about the current changes. This is a picture of North Korean missile launch, and of course we are dealing with this through implementing United Nations sanctions, mainly to intercept or prohibit the import of missile or military-related technologies, as well as import of other energy resources. So we are cooperating with other partners like Australia, Canada, or France, even Europeans, to observe the so-called sea-to-sea transfer operations on the sea near the North Korean waters in order to report back to United Nations Security Council about the violations. So we send ships and surveillance airplanes to detect these violations conducted by North Korea. Let's talk about East China Sea. This is somewhere between Japanese archipelago and Taiwan. It's called East China Sea. There's islands called Senkaku Islands. Japan Senkaku Islands in East China Sea is currently under, you have the territorial waters surrounding these islands, but Chinese government vessels, the Coast Guard vessels, are sending their vessels. China is sending their vessels of the Coast Guards to the territorial waters surrounding these islands. So this is the East China Sea where Senkaku Islands are, and this is the photograph taken by Japanese Coast Guard, sending signals or sending message to Chinese Coast Guard that these waters are Japanese territories. And although government ships of foreign countries have the right of innocent navigation under international law, we understand that they float and they don't pass by, according to the international law, the concept of innocent passage. So we warn them by sending the message by radio or showing the signs from our Coast Guard vessels that you're violating our territorial waters. This is not understood as a innocent passage. And in South China Sea, a little bit southwards, although it does not involve Japan's territory, there are islands on these areas. And in South China Sea, there are territorial disputes amongst China, Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan, and other Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia, and they have their own positions. But in recent years, we see the militarization, capturing of these islands and militarization of these islands by China, unfortunately. And we see in case of several reefs, it turned into an air base using construction methods and militarizing methods. So this is a great concern for us and of course for the Southeast Asian countries. And I forgot to mention, this is Taiwan Straits, as which I mentioned, and Northern Territories with Russia, which I mentioned in earlier slide. Now, proactive contribution to peace is the response. So we have 5 or 6 major pillars: strengthening Japan-US alliance, free and open Indo-Pacific; 3, promotion of free trade and investment; 4, wider use of development aid; 5, public diplomacy. So they are all interdependent, and these 5 pillars are used for the other purposes. For example, FOIP is using number 4, development aid, and Japan-US alliance, of course, uses development aid as a tool, and so forth. 3, promotion of free trade and investment, also used by FOIP or number 1, Japan-US alliance. So they are all interdependent elements of our policy under proactive contribution to peace concept. Now, strengthening Japan-US alliance is one of our priority in response to this difficult situation in East Asia. Prime Minister Suga had a meeting in Washington, D.C. With President Biden in April 2021. And he was actually the first face-to-face foreign government leader to have a meeting with Mr. Biden after his inauguration in January. So what are the main points of the meeting? First, enhancing deterrence and response capabilities and deepen Japanese defense cooperation, deepen Japan-US defense cooperation. So we will be doing unilaterally in coordination with the United States, enhancing our response to responsive capabilities, but also we would like to deepen our defense cooperation. Second, we talked about Chinese activities that are inconsistent with rule-based order. So the two leaders.
Ambassador, excuse me for interrupting. The slide has disappeared. Would you please fix it, or probably something went wrong? Yeah.
I have no problem with my slides, so I don't know why.
Don't have problem. All right. Yeah. Okay. I have no idea, but anyway, just to let you know. Yeah.
Let me erase it and re-roll it once more.
Yes, please.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's better.
Probably share screen could help. Or
do you see it?
No, I can't see it. Yeah.
No, you cannot see it.
I saw it when you started, but then it went off. Yeah. But well, anyway, just to let you know that. But we could.
Well, I'm very sorry.
No. We could still. Yeah. No. We could still go on, of course. But just for your knowledge, that.
How is it? No change.
No, unfortunately, no.
No. Well, maybe we'll have to re-roll everything in that case. I don't know.
Anyway, I mean, yeah. Anyway, technology is always, not very much helpful sometimes. Anyway, I think that still.
And maybe I'll just talk without slides.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Because still, it's still very educating and very enlightening. So let's go ahead.
So the highlights of Japan-US alliance. The first one is I already talked, the deepening of security cooperation, defense cooperation. The second one is response to Chinese activities, especially on the South and East China Seas, that is inconsistent with rule-based order. So we would like, and we have been very candidly communicating with Chinese, and two leaders in this occasion agreed to communicate with Chinese about our concerns. Third agreement is the North Korean nuclear and missile threats. So we agreed to promote complete denuclearization of North Korean programs, abiding by the United Nations Security Council resolutions. And fourth agreement, cooperation in achieving free and open Indo-Pacific. This is our not only just our foreign policy concept, but also United States's. So we cooperate with our close allies and partners in achieving this vision. And fifth, but not last, is launching a new partnership in innovation with United States. Innovation, COVID-19 response, and green growth. These are all global issues that we think that we can cooperate and get fruitful results through our cooperation. Now, I go to next slide. If you cannot see, let me explain. It's the cooperation with partners other than, in addition to United States, in free and open Indo-Pacific. Well, as I said, free and open Indo-Pacific is one of the key concepts of Japanese foreign policy. So maybe you should really, I regret, maybe somebody is intruding into our lecture or presentation, and
it's probably part of the hybrid war.
Yeah, but because this is a map of Indo-Pacific, and there are Pacific Ocean and Indian Ocean, two oceans connecting together. And why we promote this free and open Indo-Pacific region? One reason is that it is because the center of growth in the world economy is shifting towards this region. And maybe some statistics say 2/3 of the growth currently is coming from these regions. So that's one reason. Another reason is that world trade, maybe a large portion of it goes through the key sea lanes that is going through these two oceans. And it connects between Japan and other parts of Asia, Japan and Africa, Japan and Middle East, and Japan and the Europe. So actually it connects Japan with Georgia as well. It goes through Suez Canal and Bosporus Straits in Turkey, and reaches the ports on the Black Sea coast of Georgia. So this is not something that you see as something going on far away, but actually quite relevant to Georgian reality. And so what we do in this very important area of the world, maybe 3 or 4 things. One is promoting rule-based order. So as I mentioned about this maritime issues, the sea issues that the island disputes that they have in Southeast Asia or our Senkaku Islands. So these are not based on international laws. It's quite vividly demonstrates that they are against the rule-based order. So we would like to promote rule-based order. Of course, other than these dams, there are a lot of other issues, maybe piracy, lack of rule-based trade and investment. Those are something that we would like to promote. Second one, enhancing maritime security. So in order to cope with these concerns, we would like to enhance, for example, capability of other states of especially Coast Guard capabilities, so that they can more easily cope with the concerns in the nearby waters. So maritime security is very important. Third, under FOIP, promoting free trade agreements and economic partnership agreements. This is rule-based order promotion in the area of economy, business, trade, and investment. I'll talk about this a little bit later. And fourth, enhancing connectivity through high-quality infrastructure. We just not do something on the sea, but we are quite keen on promoting high-quality infrastructure on the ground. So it could be roads, ports, energy connection, and so forth, even people-to-people connection. And that's why we are keen to promote Georgia's connectivity as well. So these are 4 or 5 elements under free and open Indo-Pacific. I'm going to next slides, because the next slide will show you how we cooperate with other partners and how their other partners are dealing with free and open Indo-Pacific concepts. For example, ASEAN, the group of countries under Southeast Asian Association, it's called as Association of Southeast Asian Nations, already issued outlook on Indo-Pacific. There are a lot of similarities between our FOIP. The ASEAN outlook emphasizes inclusiveness, it's diversification and inclusiveness. So they have come up with its own, and the European Union, as late as April last month this year, issued a strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. So they have announced their own version. It's very similar to ours as well. In terms of concrete cooperation with other partners, Victor mentioned about the Quad. It's Quad meaning 4 countries, so it's Australia, India, Japan, and the United States. It's a group of Indo-Pacific nations, but it's not military allies or military cooperation. It's discussions on how to promote free and rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. And they are all like-minded countries. I mentioned Australia, India, Japan, and the United States. They are all democratic countries, and they are quite keen on promoting this concept of free and rule-based order in this area. That's one example. And another example is Japan-EU strategic partnership. European Union is a very strong partner of Georgia, but it's a strong partner of Japan as well. So in 2018, we signed a strategic partnership agreement that jointly promote democracy and peaceful settlement of disputes globally, but including Indo-Pacific area and also in the area of South Caucasus. So Japan and EU are globally cooperating in order to promote democratic values, peaceful settlement of disputes around the globe. So on that basis, we are promoting Indo-Pacific related concepts. One example is a connectivity partnership with the with Europe, European Union, and Japan. This was signed in 2019 at the highest level between the two partners. It's about enhancing sustainable connectivity and high quality infrastructure globally. But it also has article on Eastern Europe, which means, of course, Eastern European Partnership Agreement countries, including Georgia. So I'm quite keen to promote Georgia's connectivity with the cooperation with European Union. I will go to the next slide. It's our third response. It's a promotion of free trade and investment. Japan's major free trade agreement and economic partnership agreement with our major partners. One is with European Union. I said about Japan-EU strategic partnership agreement, but there's another big agreement. This is Japan-EU economic partnership agreement. It's FTA, free trade agreement, and promotion of high-level rules in terms of intellectual property, investment, environment, and so forth. That is related to economic activities of the two partners. So that's one example. And the second example of our free trade agreement, economic partnership agreements, is RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, that involves China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, India, and ASEAN countries. So it's a huge, actually, probably the biggest in terms of population and economic scale agreement. Maybe one of the biggest. As I go on, I will see another one, but this is virtually decreasing the many spheres of trade, increasing tariffs and promoting trade and also investment. India, unfortunately, didn't sign it, but we, although they were until signature, they were part of the agreement in terms of negotiations. So we say to the Indians that we are open to your signature. Another example of free trade agreement and EPAs is Trans-Pacific Partnership involving United States, Japan, Mexico, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, Canada, Chile, and Vietnam. USA didn't sign it. Well, actually, it signed it, but it was not ratified under Trump administration. Mr. Biden has not made clear whether he's going to sign it or not yet, but we say the doors are open. But in any case, it's involving many major countries in the Pacific area, which promotes high-level trade and investment promotion. So this is another good example. And I'll go to the next slide. It's wider use of official development aid, ODA. What is ODA? It's a grant, technical assistance to developing nations, loan, investment finance to nations like developing nations in Asia, Middle East, Africa, including Georgia. So we are assisting the self-help efforts of those countries. And we keep the policy of non-military purpose. So we don't provide military assistance to any of the countries, with very small exceptions, who are the recipient of which is mainly for those countries who can conduct joint military studies and development. Now, that was what, and now go to why. Why we do this? Because we want to promote peace and security and prosperity in developing areas, developing nations. That's first. Second, why is creation of transparent and predictable international environment. I already repeated many times about the importance of rule-based order in the globe, we want to use as a tool of our foreign policy the official development aid in order to promote this transparent rule-based order. And third, why? The third reason is is almost like same as second, but maintenance of international order based on universal values, which is something that Georgia also shares with us, which is democracy, rule of law, human rights. And we would like to promote these fundamental universal values elsewhere in other parts of the world in order to make the peace and security more secure and prosperity as well, using this our official development assistance. So those are whys. And lastly, what are the priority areas of our assistance? Maybe three priority areas. One is achieving quality growth. Quality growth. What is quality growth? It should be growth which has inclusiveness. So we don't want to, let's say, socially weak strata of your society left behind. Sustainable growth, which we care very much. So we don't want to see growth that we support end up in not sustainable, maybe in a way that is contaminating the environment, or in the way having debt accumulated so much that the recipient countries cannot pay back, and those kind of sustainable, non-sustainable developments. And another quality growth element could be a resilient growth. So it should make the country highly resilient to any natural disaster or any kind of pressure that make the country weak. So what we do under quality growth is probably promotion of high quality infrastructure, development of skills. I think development of skills for Georgia is very important. It's a priority. You have lots of very talented people. So what is maybe for them is to provide training and education. And we would like to help Georgian government in order to achieve these goals. Number two for the priority areas is sharing universal values and realizing a peaceful and secure society. Sharing universal values, I repeated many times, but I can repeat once more. So we want to achieve a strong governance of recipient countries like Georgia to promote human rights, the democracy, and rule of law in your country. And I talked already about resilient growth, but under this peaceful and secure society concept, number two priority, we would like to see, for example, disaster relief capability building. So I know that Georgia and Japan are both prone to natural disasters like earthquake, flood, or mountain fire and so forth. So we want to help recipient countries dealing more effectively in disaster relief capacity. And another example is training. I talked about training, but also in here under this concept, training police and coast guards. I mentioned about coast guards under free and open Indo-Pacific concept, but this under official development aid, we use our assistance tools to make coast guards more effective in terms of dealing with maritime security and safety. Also, training police is very important for safe society in developing nations. Third, last priority under official development aid is addressing the global issues and human security concept. Global issues is health, education, gender equality, environment, and climate change, to name a few. And we promote these very important factors in developing nations under so-called human security. Human security is a Japan promoted idea, and now it's adopted by United Nations and other countries, and it has become mainstream of ideas under development aid. It's the idea of human security is protection and empowerment of each individual. So we often say state security, but that's not enough in order to protect each individual. We need to protect them individually by giving them the chance to empower themselves. That's the concept of human security we use under development aid assistance. And last, fifth element in our foreign policy is public diplomacy. It relates to everything, all the four elements I already mentioned. It's communication to not just foreign governments, officials, but to people, to the community, the opinion leaders, policy makers, not only in the government, but outside the government, mass media or related experts. So I would say today's my presentation is part of our public diplomacy. The contents of such communication outreach for us is something that is about Japan, of course. So information of Japanese foreign policy, which I'm now engaged in, is one example, but also, other general information about Japan for better understanding our country. This will promote, the better relations with the countries that or the peoples or communities that are, hoping to understand our country, and that will promote the good, better relations, not just between governments to government, government and government, but also between the peoples, which is very important right now under, democratic environment and promotion of cultural and wider people-to-people relationship.
Sure.
And often we use culture as part of our public diplomacy because it creates a better understanding, not just policy-related issues. So we do a lot of cultural events in the countries we are stationed. That also includes Japanese language. So in several universities in Georgia, there are language courses we provide assistance. So lastly, very briefly, my time is up. So I'll talk about Japan-Georgia relations. It's consisted of 5 elements in my view. One is sharing values. And I talked about this many times, and that's democracy, human rights, rule of law, and those other, of course, other very important values that we share. Well, one of them is, of course, a Euro-Atlantic aspiration of Georgia. These are the Euro-Atlantic community is consisted of democratic countries who are our partners. So we support Georgia's aspiration very much. So when you observe the U.S. and EU-led talks between political parties in Georgia, of course, I was also communicating to many of the politicians in your parliament the importance of this, talks so that the important democratic institutions like Georgian parliament will be effectively used. Second, support for territorial integrity of Georgia. So we support, of course, Georgia's national territorial integrity. We, of course, support its boundary or border within the internationally recognized borders. So the question of this is the question of occupied territories in South Ossetia or Tskhimbal and Abkhazia. So we don't recognize, the independence of these countries. We recognize them as part of Georgia. And talking about my own experience, I went to the areas close to the administrative border or the boundary lines with South Ossetia in April, and also been to Abkhazia, the Enguli bridge that connects Abkhazia and Georgian-ruled areas. And I saw the people, in case of the Abkhazian bridge, going back and forth, although limited numbers. So we are expressing concerns about the limitation of numbers of people, as well as aggravating humanitarian situation in these two occupied areas. Third, is about ODA, the official development aid projects that I mentioned, and COVID-related assistance we are doing in Georgia. One example is a provision of medical equipment in Georgian clinics and hospitals. Actually, tomorrow I'll be holding a press conference at the Ministry of Health together with Asia Development Bank about our next package in order to deal with COVID situation. It will be a provision of medical equipment to important medical institutions in Georgia. That's third. Fourth is promotion of trade and investment with Georgia. And one example is signing of with your government investment treaty, which promotes investment between Japan and Georgia, as well as setting up standards for promotion of investment into Georgia. So this is a promotion of business activities between the two countries. And the last one, the fifth one is actually about public diplomacy in Georgia. So we promote cultural events and people-to-people ties with Georgian people. One example is what we have done recently. It's about a web cultural event on bonsai. Bonsai is a miniature, I don't know how many of you know about bonsai, but it's a miniature plants. It's trees, but it's very small, like this size. And yeah, there's one Georgian man who is a specialist in bonsai. He learned by own learning how to make bonsai. So he demonstrated his pieces and spoken, of course, in Georgian language, what is important, what is the philosophy behind this, and so forth. So this is one example of what we do in cultural sphere with Georgia. So that's all. Thank you very much, Didi Maldova, and I'll take your questions.
Ambassador. Thank you, Ambassador. You gave not just an ambassadorial presentation, but very insightful presentation. So I very much enjoyed it, and I'm pretty sure that the audience also did enjoy, and it was very educating. Because, as you pointed out, we tend to believe that we know many things about Japan, but there is still some very important parts of Japanese policy. I had a bunch of questions, and your presentation has multiplied my questions, but I would try, in the interest of time, I would try to regroup those questions and be as specific as possible. We have 10 minutes left, and hopefully we will manage to address the question at least. So you spoke about priorities of Japanese foreign policy in the times of the Cold War. And my understanding that those priorities could be singled out as two key pillars. One was deterrence of communist aggression in the region. And the second, for Japan acting as the linchpin of US strategy in the region. And but I think, the structure has not changed substantially, because to my understanding, those two pillars, even though the Cold War has ended, we still have that reality. It's not exactly about the communism, but it's again rewriting the international rules in the region, and that priority remains the same. And the second priority, again, what would be the security structure in the region? Would it be heavily hinged on the US presence, or would it be reclassified in some group alliance. You mentioned Quad, which yes, it's informal alliance. It's not a formal. It does not provide for any formal commitments, but still, I think it's a very helpful step towards bringing like-minded countries together. So my question is, Ambassador, bringing a bit of domestic politics of Japan. Up to my knowledge, there is certain divide in Japanese politics. Let's say between the hawkish wing and more mercantilist wing. It specifically relates to Japan-China relations. We all, some of us know very well that under the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, there was substantial attempts of rapprochement, which was prompted by very sound business incentives of Japan. Japan has substantial investments in China. I think that those investments are even bigger than Japan has invested in the United States, and more than nearly 8,000 Japanese companies operate in China. So I would try to formulate this question from the Georgian standpoint. In view of our environments, and I think there is very strong semblance between the Japanese example and Georgian example. And that semblance runs across two key points. The first point is about security concerns, but the second point is about trading and having sound business contacts and relationships with your own neighborhood. So would you please elaborate a little bit, how Japan is balancing between those two necessities? And what would you expect in the near term? How would you perceive the trajectory? Would that balance be kept in view of, you mentioned, for example, the same Article 9, which has been reread or interpreted on various occasions. And the last attempt has been made very recently to make Japan, I'm quoting, more a normal nation, which means about transforming Japan's self-defense forces and making Japan more proactive about foreign policy trajectory. So I would rather stop here because, again, what is your predictions? How that apparent divide in Japan's domestic politics would go on, and how it reflects and would reflect about Japan becoming more proactive in the region in the near term or in the mid-term. So I appreciate, this is a complex issue, but again, there are some lessons which we Georgians could learn how to live in the risky environment as practicably as we could. And I think that Japan's example is very knowledgeable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Victor. I think I need one hour more in order to answer these questions. But in short, yes, the security structure has not been much changed. So we call it's like a spoke. So it's about accumulation of bilateral security arrangements. We don't have NATO in Asia. So Japan, US, that's one spoke. Japan, South Korea, second spoke. US, South Korea, second spoke. US, Philippines, third, and US, Australia, fourth, and so forth. So this is a range of bilateral agreements. And now, as you said, Quad is emerging, but this is not the substitute of any of these four. Quad is just a discussion group, and it's not a security arrangement. It does not have obligation in terms of defense or, military cooperation. So it's, of course, is very important in terms of policy coordination in order to promote the rule-based order in this region, but not like U.S.-Japan security alliance. The question compared to Georgia, I think Georgia, if it joins NATO, will be much better situation since in Asia we lack this NATO type multilateral institutions, which of course is partially as a result of our own choice, probably. But the question I want to focus here is the lack of strong security cooperation, let's say with China or Russia. Although we, of course, have security dialogue with all of these countries, so we want to enhance them. But the only multilateral forum that people discuss, the policymakers discuss, is so-called ASEAN Regional Forum, ARF. And of course, it's a very important forum which we participate. North Korea also participates in this, but it's not like stronger security dialogue that will that doesn't necessarily translates to strong policy cooperation. So that's why we are still attaching the importance to the current security structure, and we're even enhancing it. And talking about our Japan-China relations and its domestic politics, I would say if we go back to, well, first of all, as you said, the economic relations between Japan and China is huge. So it's a number one economic partner of Japan, more than we have business with the United States. However, we promote rule-based order. So even in business, we see a lot of irregularities. I mean, cases where Chinese government requires Japanese investors to transfer intellectual property rights or the assets related to intellectual property rights, that is high technology and so forth, which we think is not fair, not abiding by the international rules. So, and at the same time, China has been benefiting from rule-based order in Asia or globally. So what we request Chinese is to be more responsible in abiding by the rules and promoting the rule-based order. We need to communicate repeatedly, more candidly to people in China, Chinese people, or government in Beijing, so that they be more willing and inclined to promote what I've just said. So our domestically, we have been promoting this policy. The government, of course, listened to many different views within our country, but the major consensus is based on what I have just described. Of course, we have hawkish people, but or other people who would like to promote Chinese cooperation with China. We, of course, pay great attention to them. But the balance, the outcome of the balance is such that we request the more responsible conduct by Chinese government. Another example of our cooperation with China is to promote, high standards in infrastructure building. So we often talk about the questions related to Belt and Road Initiative by China, but we tell them we are ready to cooperate with Belt and Road Initiative with Chinese if you abide by the high quality principle of building infrastructure in developing nations. So that's one example of communicating with Beijing government and promoting, asking Chinese to be more responsible to rule-based order, in this case, high quality infrastructure. In case of maritime security, I mentioned about the Chinese Coast Guard vessels intruding into our territorial waters. But what we do is we sit on the ground together, face to face, watching each other or sometimes online, and discuss each other's policies because we're very much concerned about their policy, especially the recent adoption of Chinese National Coast Guard law that allows those vessels to use forces, and the area of use of force, geographical area, is not well defined. So we convey these concerns, and they ask questions. This kind of discussions, direct discussions on the maritime security issues with Chinese is very important. So it's, of course, and also the within this discussions, of course, we're trying to establish a direct hot channel with military to military actors on the ground or on the sea, or Coast Guard vessels. So these are considered to be efforts to create better mutual understanding or mutual trust, even for the sake of a stable and peaceful and more cooperative East China Sea, which we approaching Chinese, with which we are approaching the Chinese. So I think I answered many questions. Self-defense forces under Article 9 will, of course, will not be fighting a war overseas when we're not attacked and when our self-defense right is not invoked. So that's the limitation we have under Article 9. So when the Gulf War or war in Iraq took place, we did not participate in military operations, combat operations in Iraq. We sent troops after the combat has stopped. The troops of our self-defense forces to engage in reconstruction efforts in the southern part of Iraq, for example. So this is the limitation. So within this limitation, we would like to, of course, increase our defense capabilities, which we agreed with the United States as late as this April. Okay. So I hope I answered your questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And one more question, and to wrap up our webinar session. It's not probably a question as much as my observation. You mentioned on various occasions free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, which is the pillar of Japan's foreign policy. And this name is not attractive just as the name, but I think it has very practicable implications when we speak about the Black Sea. And I think that there could be some very good knowledge and real implications how that strategy could be, I'm not saying transplanted, but could be viewed through the optics of the freedom of navigation in the Black Sea. Of course, I very much appreciate that each region has its own specifics, and the Black Sea has its own specifics for many reasons, starting with the Montreux Convention, et cetera, But I think, I'm trying to think, what could be potential bridges of bringing Japan and Georgia together around more issues of substance, I would say. And I think that an exchange of your lessons and of your knowledge and your experience could be very much helpful, especially when we pose a question over the recent times about the active presence of the West in the Black Sea. And this is the legitimate question. And I think, the strategy which you're pursuing, the free and open Indo-Pacific, could be discussed down further the road when we speak about the Black Sea. So that's one point, and I think that we should be promoting that knowledge and experience through the optics of the Black Sea region. That's one point. And the second point, Ambassador, which also I would voice up as our common concern. You remember when we met last time and you mentioned about your presentation, the Senkaku and Senkaku Islands, and the Senkaku paradox, which is the connotation of not risking a war between great powers because of relatively small issues. And I think, this is very sort of, the challenging issue both for Japan and Georgia, how to keep the required support without putting your strategic ally into a problem any bigger than tackling the problem on the ground could deserve. So I think, when we speak about the rule-based order, which you also mentioned on various occasions, I think that there is certain toolkit, a certain recipe, which the international law and international order still does not have. And how we could both think about working out that recipe or that toolkit, that relatively small values are not sacrificed for the sake of preserving, big stakes, because value is the value in any respect. It does not matter whether the value of a small scale or a big scale, because it's about the principles. And I think, those two venues of our communications between official Tbilisi and official Tokyo, or between non-public actors like us, analytical centers, think tanks, could be a very good venue for promoting ideas in a very sound, in a very healthy way. So, as I said, this is not as question as reflections, and probably I would, once again, with your kind permission, would solicit your views on emphasizing those two key aspects of our to-be cooperation or to-be collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you. So on the Black Sea issue, I fully agree with you. So that we really need to enhance our policy dialogue, including dialogue on the security situation in both of our countries. So I think we need to enhance discussions on what we do. First of all, for Japan, what we do in the Pacific, and what in terms of Georgia, what you do in the Black Sea region or the South Caucasus. And that enhances our mutual understanding of not just what the other party does, but the relevancy of what the other party does, relevancy to yourself. And as I said, I tried to mention today is that what we do in the Pacific is very relevant. One I mentioned is about this trade sea lane link that you have. So whatever you import from Asia through the sea matters for free and open in the Pacific, or vice versa. Free and open in the Pacific matters for what you import or export, do trade with Asia. But not only trade and business, but also these principles that you mentioned, Victor, about the that you cannot make compromise with, is very vibrant in our free and open in the Pacific concept. And that is really, really relevant to Georgia. So if you compromise in those principles in free and open in the Pacific, Japan, hypothetically, if we make compromise in one area on these principles, then we have a less effective position in other areas in the same principle. So that is, as you rightly said, something that we cannot really afford or make it happen. So that's the meaning of relevancy. So for that, I think we need to enhance the dialogue between governments, but also between think tanks, between experts, and know each other about what we do in each of our regions and how they are mattering to the other side. And lastly, you mentioned about Senkak paradox, but I think we discussed this privately the other day, but this is not applicable to Senkak Islands, in my view, because if Japan and the United States have been repeatedly saying that U.S.-Japan or Japan-U.S. security treaty is applicable to these islands. It doesn't matter the geographical scale, how small they are our territory, and Japan has the U.S. has the obligation to defend us if our territories are invaded. So Article 5 of this U.S.-Japan Security Treaty clearly describes this relationship. And during the summit talks, and even before that, in April, we announced this clearly in our joint statement. So there's no doubt if anything happens, if these islands are invaded by a foreign country, of course, the treaty will be applicable. And of course, as I said in my slide earlier, that we will promote, and we are promoting our own defense capabilities in effectively dealing with the potential threats in these islands, like amphibious military operations, for example, and enhancing our monitoring or surveillance capabilities through our military means. So I don't think the sacrificing a small territory is possible in this case. And as you rightly said, again, here, the principle of territorial integrity in case of Japan is should not be compromised. And it's a really uncompromising concept.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. So thank you very much indeed. I think that your point was very important for the Georgian audience, because when we live in times of idealism versus realism, that was very important. That even if you don't have a formal letter or of a letter of formal commitment, still principles, still certain international norms and comity, of course, matters. And it's also important, when we speak about the Georgian case, which is very unfortunate because of our occupied territories. And that occupation does not mean that the occupation could be forgiven or could be abandoned or could be discarded for the sake of greater values or greater stakes, I would say. So that this is very important. And I think that the Japanese foreign policy and the Georgian foreign policy, regardless of big differences in capacity, in size, or differences in objectives, the priorities still are the same, and those unite us. And that's what makes, Japan so close to Georgia's hearts and minds. And I do very much thank you, Ambassador. I think that regardless of many differences on many topics, we have huge, big similarities on key points, which means defending morality, defending rule-based order, and defending very basic principles. So I thank you very much indeed. And with regard to presentation, if you could please, when we finish this webinar, could please share the link so we could attach it to the recorded video. I think, that we would compensate somehow, the technical glitch which we had in course of the webinar. So, Ambassador, I would finish our webinar. Thank you so much indeed. I'm always been always saying that Japan traditionally has an outstanding ambassadors to Georgia, and we are very much fortunate having this time again a very outstanding and very distinguished ambassador like you, because you do a great job for the sake not just of Japan but for the sake of Georgia too. And I think that footprint and that sort of the credibility of your deeds and words and actions, which you deserve and which you fully enjoy in Georgian audience, I'm just conveying this from the bottom of my heart, and I do thank you for all the great job you're doing, and I wish you all the best in your diplomatic stint. So enjoy your career, your Georgian leg of career, diplomatic career, and we very much stand next to you. We very much stand next to Japan, and we feel that great support from you personally and from the Japanese nation. So thank you so much indeed. And we at Geocase are very much keen to promote that format of public diplomacy as well. So please treat us as your good friends and good partner in that respect. So thank you and have a good day. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Victor. For warm wars, I felt and still feeling very much that Georgians are quite warm people, and I've been enjoying your culture, your history, your people, and this kind of a very human to human context is making diplomats life work effective, very of course comfortable, and really appreciate this kind of support from Georgian people. And next time, maybe if I have chance, we should talk a little bit about Georgians' favorite subject matter, which is Japanese culture or history.
Look forward to.
Yeah, and of course
Sure.
we are quite keen on Georgian culture as well, food as well. So I hope we can continue our cooperation in the future and make Japanese subject matter in Georgia continuously vivid and have meaningful implications to many areas of your life. Thank you so much, Victor, for the opportunity.
Thank you,
to talk.
Ambassador. And we'll sure do, and see you next time. See you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.